Okay, so it's a pleasure and honor to have with us here to help us think through this issue of the borders, uh, Matt Sedillo, who's an internationally renowned poet, a founding member of Tele-Jaguar, and the literary director of the Daw Center for the Arts out in Los Angeles. So Matt, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm very honored.
Yeah, so I think that the way we can structure the conversation to begin with is have you give your stab at a couple of the questions that we use in order to think through the issues on the reading list and for the week's topic, this global social problem of borders. The first question, and I'll just throw it out to you, is are border walls and fences but a last vestige of a dying system of territorially bounded sovereignty? So what do you think about that, Matt?
Well, I mean, it's a very timely question for us living in the United States. I'm not sure what the situation is like out in Great Britain in terms of what people are advocating in terms of securing borders or whatever. But here in the United States, you have one candidate, Donald Trump, who became very politically, defined his kind of political career on this erecting of the border wall, and on the other hand, you have Joe Biden, who who one of his talking points is like, unlike most Democrats, I voted for the border fence, right? So you have this kind of fence versus wall type election here in 2020 in the United States. And so, do I think that this is a dying thing? I mean, I'm not so sure. I think that in some ways it can be viewed as with the night is darkest before the dawn sort of thing, especially here in the United States, because what is propelling these questions of a wall and a fence are not just, it's not simply, you can't look at it in terms of just um, there's this homeostasis population, right? There's like this population and it's always been there and it's always like that, and they're now for no reason whatsoever going to erect, or they're going to erect a wall just because this is an idea they have, right? So it's like
Mm,
these are our stats, is whatever. No, if you look at the populations of every single state with the exception, and DC is not a state, but it's got a weird status, but with every single state, the decline of what are called non-Hispanic whites has declined in the last 10 years. The percentage of non-Hispanic whites in every state, including like Alabama, including
mm,
whatever, the percentage share of what are called non-Hispanic whites has declined in every single state of the union. So that is, that is telling of something. That speaks to something. And if you look at the 2016 run of Donald Trump, a lot of the people, and not just him, but his surrogates and a lot of people around him, and all was swirling around him. And it seems ridiculous to talk about, right? But you kind of have to mention it because it was part of the Republican National Convention, right? So speaking about Lou Holtz, the football coach, it seems like a ridiculous topic. Like, why would you be talking about Lou Holtz? Well, it's about as ridiculous as talking about Donald Trump being president, right? It's absurd, but it happened. And so Lou Holtz was a speaker at the RNC, and Lou Holtz said in his comments there that I don't want to become you. I don't want to drink your beer. I don't want to root for your soccer games. Essentially finding all these cultural touchstones that would be associated with Mexican people as opposed to good old Americans, right?
mm,
Scott Baio, the same convention, says, "Let's make America great again, but let's make America America again." Right?
mm.
That's another thing. So it seems ridiculous to me to talk about Chachi, but Chachi was speaking at the RNC. I mean, there's no
Yeah.
way around it. I mean, it's yes, it's ridiculous to be talking about Scott Baio. But we live in a ridiculous era where Donald Trump is president. So
Mm,
these things happen, right? And these things happen on the basis of, we're going to build this wall to protect what is ours, right? Leading into it, you had one of his surrogates speak about, like, the DNC, they were speaking Spanish, and I'm going to have to brush up on Dora the Explorer, right?
mm,
Another person, you had another person, very famous, most famously, he was a Mexican guy, but they had the Latinos for Trump. He says, there's going to be taco trucks in every corner. But these kind of warnings about the demographic shift, about the changing of the people who are there, is what animated this entire build the wall
mm.
mentality, right? The wall had to be built because the numbers of people were changing, because there was too many Mexicans in America, making it no longer America, right?
Mm,
And
mm,
so that demographic panic, it cannot. So in some ways, it could be viewed as a dying gasp, as a last gasp, but it's also it's also that gasp is coming because of something. It's that gasp is in a response to something, and it's not in response to people just being different, and generations having different opinions, as is often, portrayed. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so um, that's why the wall, the fence, all these things, they're coming up for a reason. You know what
So
I'm
it's
saying?
linked. It's linked. Would you say to how the nationalist imaginary, dominant nationalist imaginary, understands the ethnic and racial composition of the people, and the wall is needed to protect the purity of the people from this contamination or something like this.
Absolutely. And you have someone like uh, recently got arrested, Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon in that time period, he was saying that society is more than an economy. It's more than just whatever. Because people are talking about like, yeah, jobs, workers, and Steve Bannon like stopped and said, no, 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 like like the society is more than that. It's a civil society. And in that, he started talking about ethics, and he started talking about this, he started talking about this. But he started with very racially coded language about protecting a civilization, right?
Yeah.
And that had everything to do with demographics. That was really funny to watch. In those early days of the Trump presidency, when they went to Saudi Arabia, and you see these two figures. You see Rex Tillerson, right, the oil man who became the the Secretary of State, dancing with like Saudi, his Saudi counterparts, and you see like Bannon horrified to be surrounded by these Arab men in Arab garb, right? And so on the one hand, you see this kind of transnational capital of just rich guys like, hey, it's time to dance. This is how we dance here, right? This is how we do the dance of wealth when we're in Saudi Arabia. In Houston, we do it a little different, but here's how we do it here. Um, and Steve Bannon, who took that stuff very seriously, who was very much a part of that ideological campaign, and his real fear of quote unquote other, in this case Arabs, but like um, but if you look at the question of borders, though, the Mexican border, and what that meant to the Trump campaign, it meant something. It meant something very ideological. It was very cathartic for his followers. Like there's a number of articles that came out that spoke to like what it was like to go to a Trump rally, and all the articles indicated and confirmed that the high point of any one of these rallies was when he started saying, "Build the wall,
Yeah,
build the
build the
wall, build the
wall,
wall."
build the
We're all
wall.
chanting.
It was the one policy that was clear that he was clear that he had was build
Right.
the wall, which in a way is ironic because there already is a massively fortified wall.
Not
So,
funny, but yes, yes, it is. But then he also he would turn to the audience and he said, and who will pay? And they would chant back, Mexico will pay. So it became like this like rock concert of hate, right?
mm,
And so this Mexico will pay thing is very much an echo of Remember the Alamo. It's very much an echo of like the Mexico's going to pay for what they've done to us, right?
yeah,
And so this kind of false victim narrative narrative that's kind of funny,
yeah,
this kind of this false victimhood, this narrative of like what you've done to us, when they're actually the ones who are doing the horrible things. um
yeah,
it was central to his campaign. It was central. And so it's not just the building of the wall, or the building of the fence. And we talk about the fence. I mean, that there's a fence that already exists. It's on the California border, and it's a brutal thing to see. It's a brutal thing to see. I was there not too long ago. I was in Tijuana, and I saw where Friendship Park kind of meets, and on the other side of the border, right? I'm on the Mexican side of the border at the time, and I see on the other side of the border there are agents on horseback, and they go back and forth. They were going back and forth into the water, right? Not too deep, but like a little bit, right?
mm,
And so it's kind of like, so let's say someone was trying to like cross the border that way, someone was just like doing a little scuba thing, right? You would have crushed their head, you know,
yeah,
doing things that
yeah.
way. I mean, it's really, I mean, like, and at
The
first look,
violence, the violence of the border.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So I'm looking at him like that's absurd. What you're doing is absurd. That's silly, right? But then it occurred to me what he was doing. Like, oh my God, you are you are doing this in case like someone can. I mean, I don't even know how you would do that, to swim like 3 feet below. I mean, I don't even know how that'd be even possible. But like but just in case. So I
yeah,
mean, it's some pretty brutal stuff.
yeah. Well, and obviously, the California economy relies upon migrant labor. So there is, and this I think was what Wendy Brown is kind of getting to in part, is that when it comes to thinking about the way that the economy functions, both in terms of transnational capital flows, but also in terms of migrant labor as being central to the political economy of the country. This is all to some degree theater.
Yeah,
It's a violent theater. It's a very real effects on people's lives, but it's not really about keeping people out so much as it is keeping people rightless, keeping
I
people.
absolutely agree with that.
Yeah.
Let's more the drug war.
Yeah, yeah. I guess that leads into the second question, which is linked to some of the readings that the students have been dealing with for this week, which is this notion of border imperialism. How useful do you think the concept of border imperialism is? How do you understand it, and how would you employ it?
Well, so much of what we consider the modern nation state of Europe, right, which becomes a template for carving up the entire world, right? I think is formed in many ways, like these borders. I mean, some are older, some are rare, but a lot of like the borders formed around the securing of national markets, right? So, like, we can't disconnect the nation state itself, the formation of the modern nation state, not peoples and like nations the way sometimes Marxists use it, right? Is defined by these certain characteristics being a nation, right? But the nation state,
Mm.
uh, I don't think as it came into the world can be disconnected from imperialism. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And it draws its borders based on the basis of markets, and it draws its borders on the basis of like what it can, in terms of Europe, in terms of France, in terms of Spain, in terms of England and Belgium. They draw the borders around the world as to what they can yank out of the sands of that part of the world and out of the
Mm.
backs of the people living there, right?
Mm. Mm.
So the borders came into the world through imperialism. The borders we understand, the modern borders, they came into the world through global imperialism. So I think that this, to speak of border imperialism is, on the one hand, stunningly correct, and on the second hand, almost redundant. It's almost so
Yeah.
true that it becomes redundant. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And so like, and that's not an insult. I'm being
Yeah.
poetic, right? But no, I would definitely agree. Um, to speak of border imperialism, and when we talk about, I'm not really an expert on the entire world, but to speak here in America, I mean, this is absolutely true. And to connect the earlier point about this being theater, I mean, you have to consider that in the United States of America, something called Operation Wetback was happening simultaneously with the Bracero program. And what
Mm.
the Bracero program was bringing workers up from Mexico and having them work, and the Mexican government and the United States government both complicit in injustices that took place during the Bracero program, right? Um, but they're kind of like, they're bringing workers back and forth. Where at the same time, you have Operation Wetback, which is a mass deportation, a brutal one. Where I mean, there are certain instances where people died in the ocean. It was like I have to get more into details on that one, but um, but like you know, there is a you know there's a long history of this. It's not like something that began in the 90s. It's not something that began in this recent period of time. And when you spoke earlier to this area being built up by by uh, by migrant labor, or the economy
Mm.
depending on migrant labor. Well, that's true of the United States in general, but it's truly true of areas, in the Southwest, in the areas that in the Sun
Definitely.
Belt. Now, here's the interesting thing about that: is 7 out of 10 of the largest cities in the United States of America are in the Southwest, or in
Yeah.
areas that were once Mexico, right?
Yeah.
And
That were
a
once
lot of,
Mexico. I think that's a key point too. We didn't cross the border crossed us, as they say.
right?
Yeah.
As I
Yeah.
said. And so the area, 7 out of 10 of the largest cities in the United States of America today are in that. So you see this is a growing population, you see this growing. But all this grew up on the back of migrant labor, of Mexican labor, of it grew up out of that. You know what I'm saying? We're talking about the
Yeah.
Bracero program, we're talking about uneven wages, we're talking about underpaying Mexicans that has gone on throughout. We could describe as the brown wage, I suppose,
Yeah.
and which is the lowest in America, by the way. I mean, like, the so-called Latino is the lowest paid worker. The Latina is the
Yeah.
lowest paid worker in America, 54 cents on the dollar. So that's
Yeah.
kind of, but that has been, but that includes everybody. That includes Puerto Ricans, includes all, like Peruvians and
Yeah.
people on the East Coast as well. But that constituency that's made up out in the Southwest, um, underpaying them, exploiting them, hyper exploitation, and exploitation, a rate of exploitation which is higher than the general population, is how these areas were built up.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And because Los Angeles is a global alpha mega blah 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 city today, but in 1910 Los Angeles is smaller than Cincinnati. You know what I'm saying? So like the growth of these places, the growth of Los Angeles, the growth of San Diego, the growth of Phoenix, the growth of et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It was on the backs of migrant and primarily Mexican.
Yeah. Yeah, no, very, very to the point. And I also think when we think about this concept of border imperialism, and we're thinking about the borders that exist in North America, that there's the imperialism vis-a-vis United States vis-a-vis Mexico, obviously. There's also the sort of the second level of the imperialism, which is of all the settler colonial peoples over the indigenous peoples. So there's this kind of double layer of imperialism within imperialism when we get to that kind of border imperialism. Um, Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, like it's an interesting question. I mean, you start getting into like well, to what right did the Mexican state have to these places that were torn from Mexico? Like these are originally indigenous territories, but such a deep and complex question because there was so much going on in the Mexican War of Independence. I mean, it's led by like Afro-Mexicanos, it's led by very indigenous people,
Yeah.
it's led by what was the Mexican state? Why did it end up being called Mexico and not being called Nueva something, right? So like the
Nueva
ideas of
something,
like
nueva algo.
yeah, right. And so why did it become Mexico? Why did it take on that? Why the
Yeah.
iconography of
Yeah.
the iconography of the eagle and the serpent? So like
Yeah.
these ideas of like this was going to be like an indigenous type nation were present in the casting out of Spain. So there's a kind of that's a very very like complex and
Yeah.
rich thing. The history of the Anglo settlement over this area much less complex, much more direct, right? So you have someone like so I have this book. I mean, like here, seamless plug, Mowing Leaves of Grass. But the
That's
reason it's
right.
called
I have it here too.
yeah, the reason it's called Mowing Leaves of Grass is because it's because Walt Whitman is the preeminent American poet. I mean, to this day still is. I mean, him and Edgar Allan Poe, right? It's like a kind of a neck and neck thing, right? But he's still seen as like the guy, the bard of American poetry. I mean, there's some people in the 20th century that could like maybe are closing in, maybe like Maya Angelou or or Bukowski or something like that. But really, if you start going to these MFA classes, like this guy's still like the guy, right?
Yeah, of
He's still
course.
like yeah, him and Poe maybe, and
Yeah.
so like they're seen as like the great American poets that can like stand up to anyone in across the historical canon, by which they mean other Europeans, right?
Yeah.
But but he was a guy who's deeply racist. I mean, he was deeply racist on many questions, and I don't want to make it sound like he was only against Mexicans because he was deeply racist on many questions. Um, but he also was the author of the quote, "What is miserable, inefficient Mexico with her burlesque upon liberty to do with the grand mission of people in the New World with a noble race?" And he said that in thrust of the Mexican American War, like this was a good thing. He also, in Leaves of Grass, which is published in the 1850s, has a poem where he says, "California, I will teach you this robust American love." Now, when he says this is a time period of this is a time period of the gold rush. This is a time period of the foreign miners tax. This is a time period of the Greaser Act, right? Now, the Greaser Act, in many ways, was a vagrancy law, but it was one of the very early type vagrancy laws that were really racially targeting people, right? And so, like, it becomes, some people have argued that it actually is kind of a forerunner to Jim Crow, to the Jim Crow black codes, the later use in the South, and they were targeting what they would refer to as Indians of Mexican descent, and that was
Indians of Mexican descent. Yeah.
right, and so like that which could really be anybody. And so that was like that was the Greaser Act, and so like that was it was that was something in the 1850s, and this, you have Walt Whitman at the time period saying, "California, I will teach us robust American love." And so like what is robust American love? You know, what is robust
Mm.
American love? Robust American love appears to be, vagrancy laws. It's lynching. It's murder.
Genocide, genocidal.
Genocide. Yeah.
Uh,
It's the formation of the California Rangers, who were formed
yeah.
to hunt down what they would call the five Joaquins. And that was a brutal time period where they were hunting down, these quote unquote banditos, and they ended up beheading a man, and they paraded his head in a jar for
Mm,
years
mm,
until the earthquake in San Francisco.
mm. Yeah, so it's a bloody history, it's a brutal history, and it's something that isn't only history, but it's a legacy that is very much present, as you began the conversation with talking about the salience in particular, anti-Mexican, but in general, anti-migrant discourse to the "Make America Great" platform, so to speak.
Yeah.
I want to get you to share some of your poetry
Okay.
with the students. Yeah, I mean, you have within this excellent book of poems, which is not your first book of poems, and it's also not going to be your last.
Yeah.
There are several poems that I think speak very directly to this question of borders. So why don't you choose and give the students a flavor of what you do.
All right. Excellent. Excellent. I'm gonna do stuff commonly discussed. All right. This one's carved over. This one's about the demographic. It's kind of like that, and then I'll get to the other two. All right. Draw a map. Line the sand. Carve the desert. Act on land. Amend it. Eminent domain. Indefinite detention. Private prisons. Public referendum. Gentrification. Naturalization. Americanization. Forced sterilization. Make America great again. Mexico will pay. The hunt for Murrieta. The hunt for Pancho Villa. John Pershing's slaughter of the innocents, a severed head, touring California museums becomes Zorro, becomes the Wild Bunch, becomes whitewashed, this American life experience, its imagination. If you can dream it, you can see it. And if you can see it, you can build it. If you can build it, you can take it. And if they resist, manifest a cruelty so complete that for generations, they will do it to themselves. Build a city, draw its borders, patrol its districts, add silence to injury, insult without memory, protect these borders from language and culture, taco trucks and Dora the Explorer. The country is changing, you know it. It's simple mathematics, and you know it. You have kept us weak by keeping us confused. Your grandchildren will speak Spanglish in the neighborhood you grew up in, greeting their friends on the corner of your childhood and cherished memories. Under lamplight and faded mist, the historic side of your first kiss, where you learned to sink before you learned to swim, where you and she carved your names to trees and promised each other forever. Memories fade. Neighborhoods change. And your names will be carved over. There's nothing you can do about it. And you know this too. So when Donald Trump says drug dealers and rapists, and Kelly Osbourne jumps in to correct him, no, Donald, those people are just here to clean our shit. When you sit so comfortably, speak so freely about a group of people who are somehow everywhere, yet at the same time, no one. Hold your tongue. We are far closer than you know.
Right on. Right on.
All right. So this one kind of is a kind of a what do you call it? What's that? What's that when you have like when you like do a real court like a course sample or not like
A
a survey?
smorgasbord.
A smorgasbord.
A survey. You want the social science
Social science.
terminology?
Yeah. This one's kind of a survey, I guess, of American history. So it's gonna pull in a lot, right? But it's short.
What's it called?
Stolen life, stolen land. It's
Right
cutting
on.
direct to the heart of it.
Yes.
Sundown, Levittown, Fort Apache, Dirty Harry, John Wayne, Blackface, Minuteman, Moynihan, Gone with the Wind, Breaking Bad. Washington, Redskin, Confederate flag, the sword, the dollar, the cannon, the scholar, the cavalry, and the Ivy League. History is written by lightning as the rising smoke of burning village. The ways and means which victors keep their victims. A frontier thesis and notes on the state of Virginia, extraction, expansion, the winning of the West, Lewis and Clark, Smith and Wesson. I'll circle the wagon with bloodshed and slave sweat, the crack of the whip, the law of 3/5, the crown republic of King Khan, the intended failures, the reconstruction, the housing covenants that greeted great migrations of the saints, the Mexicans, of poor Mexico. So far from heaven and so close to Monroe Doctrine. to Davy Crockett, to prison industrial complex, a war on drugs, a war on young. Bloody Christmas, Reefer Madness, 15 to life for 4 ounces, East Oakland, West Baltimore, South La Brea, all over North, Plymouth Rock, Jamestown, Rio Grande, stolen lives, stolen land.
Nice, nice.
Yeah. And this last one, this poem here is about this poem here is really about, it's kind of bridging like my own personal experiences with like kind of like, you know, the larger history. So that's the best way to put it. And it's called Pilgrim. See, some are born in summer homes and palatial groves where pain was only to ever unfold from the pages of secret gardens where effort grows, but not I. See, I come from the stock of star-eyed astronauts who greet the night sky with big dreams and wide eyes, always running down the Devil's Highway through occupied America. On the way back to house on Mango Street and all those books you didn't want us to read. Raised on handball off the back wall of a panaderia born east the river post Mendez versus Westminster, one generation with the red lines and diplomas that were signed at those dreams. And that skin need not apply. See, I come from struggle. And if my story offends you, it's because you made the mistake of seeking your reflection in my self-portrait. See, this, well, this may not be about you. Because some are born in the common core, whose reflected faces grace the pages of doctrines to discover and age to be explored. World hardships crashed against new shores, New England, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, for others pushed off Turtle Island. Aslan, do not call this brown-skinned immigrant. Child of the sun. Son of the conquest, Mexicano blood, running through the veins, east side of Los Angeles. Do not tell him it will native tongue and song will best be sung. Do not tell me who I am. Because I was raised like you. Miseducated in some of those very same schools off lessons and legends of honest Indians and Christian pilgrims and a nation of immigrants all united in freedom. That isn't until they pulled aside my white friend, pointed directly at me and said, Scott, I judge you by the company you keep and you spend your time with this. That's the same old story, 1846. The adventures of Uncle Sam, the stick up Manny Wetback. Show me your papers, now give me your labor, the melting pot. It's never made for the hands who clean it. The American dream has always come at the expense of those who tucked it in. You don't know that. You don't teach it. Could write you a book, but you won't read it, so you know what this is about you. In 1492, and the Treaty of Guadalupe in California missions and Arizona schools, these racists that try to raise their kids in cities that bear our names, which you can learn some digs from Ferdinand to Minuteman, from Arpaio to Alamo, from Voodoo to Joaquin the Indian, that still lives in me, from May 8 to 43, and try to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds. Canea Mines, Lino Strike, the Plan de Ala, Zapata, Joaquin Murrieta, Las Adelitas, Brown Baresi, Zapatistas, Richard Nixon, to Napoleon, from Peckinpah to Houston, from Lone Star Republic to Christopher Columbus, all the way down to Donald fucking Trump. We didn't cross the borders crossed us. Who you calling immigrant, Pilgrim?
Right on. Very powerful stuff, Matt.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. But the one thing I want to say about that poem Pilgrim is that it includes a lot of things about the ethnic studies band that happened in Tucson, right? And it pairs that against reading Where the Red Fern Grows and The Secret Garden, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And these are things you're supposed to read as a child, right? These things that like, oh, or S.E. Hinton or something like that. These are children, your children identify with this, right? But when you actually give, you know, young developing people, you know, young developing minds, an image of their self-reflection, that was banned.
Yeah.
We don't want them to see that. We don't want them to have a conception of themselves. We don't want them to see themselves in the mirror, right? We don't want them to see that they're capable of writing books. We don't want them to know that. We want them to be janitors. We want them to be, we want them to work in the back rooms, and we want them to be, you know, the pillar of the economy.
Yeah.
Now, there's nothing wrong with being a janitor or that. I mean, I think that globally, what has to happen, one of the things that has to happen, in addition with, you know, national struggle for, you know, liberation, and for, you know, all peoples to be equal, but within that, I mean, we have to have the struggle for all labor to be exalted. You know what I'm saying? You know, like, you cannot force people to be janitors or whatever if janitors are compensated the way they should be.
Yeah.
If the work is respected as it should be.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? We can't live in a world where it's an insult to be a janitor. We can't live in a world where it's an insult to be a maid. We can't live in a world where these positions of labor are both compensated as they should be, and they are also exalted as they should be.
Well, it touches upon the issues that we're going to be dealing with in next week's lecture, which is this strange way in which that reality comes through in the COVID-19 pandemic with this category of essential workers.
Right.
Which
But
is really,
you can't racialize a position in the economy, right? As it's like racialized, right? You cannot racialize a job if that job is exalted. If that
yeah, that's
job
right.
if that job is treated the same with the same respect and regard and compensated in the same way as, say, a university professor.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Powerful, crucial point to the whole question of the relationship between labor and the social order more generally. Yeah, well, any final thoughts you have on these issues of borders? Anything, your last words you want to leave with the class here?
I mean, fight the good fight. In the United States, taco trucks in every corner. But I want to encourage everybody to check out Tele-Jaguar, which is the group that I'm one of 4 people that founded online. We come up with
And we'll have that information available. We'll get it up on the course material on the
right.
internet. So yeah.
So we give you a slice of like Chicano life intermixed with like all kinds of historical things. So there's some funny memes from there, but a lot of it, we have a lot of infographics. We did one on the Lemon Grove incident. We did one on the Madanza. We did one on Mendez versus Westminster. We did one on we've done several. We've done one on the Chicano moratorium. We did we've done several, and we're gonna keep doing them. So they're gonna keep coming out. So that's
Right.
what
Right on. Well, it's always a pleasure to be in dialogue with you, Matt. Not the first time that we've intersected here, and I think it's a real privilege for the students to get to listen to your words of wisdom, and also obviously to listen to you do what you do with the poetry, which is really amazing stuff. So thanks, man.
I'm deeply appreciative. Thank you.
All right, peace.